whether that's successful or entirely possible is a much harder thing, I think, to pin down, and it depends.
It's very complex because it brings us to the question of memory. Is a dog trained, and is this based on instinct and instinctual responses, or does the dog actually, do animals have a memory, and how do they interpret the past and on? So.
And she would definitely insist that the instinct versus, that humans are equally characterized by their use of instinct, and so like animal instinct and human instinct, why should they be so divided? But animals and memory, I think those are more complicated questions. She has lots of interesting case studies, but sort of circulates through lots of other animals and lots of other people's practices. So the example of a woman who went to study, an anthropologist who went to study baboons, actually started out in another community that was too aggressive, and she went to a baboon community and was trying to keep her distance as a good researcher should, and then discovered that the baboons weren't acting as they normally would because they were aware of her being there. So she ended up actually acting and taking on some of their signs and integrating herself a tiny bit into the community, and thus was able to sort of let them be as they wanted to be. So there's an idea that you have to close some of the distance in order to actually be able to recognize a community as it's functioning without you there. So there is no separation. There's no way to observe from the outside and assume that you're letting another community be as it would be without you. There's always the implication that you've already changed it by watching it. And I think that's also interesting in film, the sort of occasional piece you get of the fact that you change whatever you view by your very sort of gaze. And so I think that way of incorporating a responsibility in spectatorship is kind of another interesting implication of that.
Along the same line, I was sort of interested, just thinking about the production of the movie. Is there any way that the kind of tension between all the very convincing and elegant ideas you've been putting forth connect to the actual production of the movie with like highly trained animal actors, presumably, right? Thinking about sort of the use of the animals in the film, is there any kind of tension that reflects in the film in any way, where that presumably the goats kind of are getting signals and they're all kind of ever being controlled by the director in a certain way that may or may not, maybe they get carrots, I don't know, kind of how is there consensus or participation in the film as, right, anyway, you could
as sort of willing and cooperative. Well, it's interesting, I just realized, I had not realized before that I had extra materials on the Wind Blows Round DVD, and they have all these shots of them trying to get children and goats to cooperate at the right time, and everybody's yelling and the goats are milling around, and it seems like actually the film was the result of some fortunate camera work a lot of the time, and that there was a lot of other chaos and things not going as planned. And I think everybody who worked on that film in particular talked about the patience that was required. They were there for an entire season, so they filmed throughout the winter and into the spring. And people sort of lived the tensions and spoke of it in that way. It's interesting also that in the extra materials there are all of these shots of animals that don't actually appear in the film. So like roosters just standing up on the side of the road. You could tell that the cameras were also sort of taking serendipitously all of the shots that they could get. And then I think it's mostly the editing process that allows one to see things as sort of well-behaved or proceeding as they should. So that off-camera work is something I'm really interested in. Actually, in this wider project, I'm interested in getting to the point where I can talk to the directors, the people who are actually making the films, the people who participate in them. A lot of them are non-professional actors, about the experience of having this production sort of sweep through town and change it. I'm relatively sure that this will have resulted in some tourism for an area where a film had never been made before. But the film itself represents a tension between a tourist and a more permanent presence in a village that I think they said there are 9 inhabitants in the village that we saw now during the year. And if you read the New York Times, there are frequently now stories of these luxury hotels that are going into entire towns that have been purchased by hoteliers in southern Italy, but there's room for that in northern Italy too, places that are so underpopulated that they can buy the entire village and then turn it into a destination for... I know.